Media International, www.netivyahinternational.org.
Shalom, my name is Joseph Shulam, and I am the retired founder and director of Nativia Bible Instruction Ministry in Jerusalem, and I could say the rabbi of the Shepherd of Israel congregation, founder and rabbi of the Shepherd of Israel congregation, and I'm glad that we have, with God's grace, raised a second generation of leadership that is local, that was born and raised in our ministry and in our congregation here. And they're like my children, and I love them and appreciate them very much. Last week, Yuda, who is a wonderful young man with a wonderful family and 3 wonderful children and a wonderful wife, and he is now the leader, I could say the rabbi of the Roy Israel congregation, and we are leading in tandem together for several reasons, at least till everything falls in the groove and is straightened in the straightened path of the Lord and His kingdom. So he came to me last week and said, we're going to have a picnic on Thursday, July 25th, and we'd like for you to talk about the Lord's Supper. There's a lot of questions about the Lord's Supper and what we do, and we'd like for you to teach about it. Well, today is Thursday, and this afternoon, later on, there will be the picnic, and I will go there, and Marcia is not feeling so good, so she will stay home with Amy, our real dear friend and helper in the house. And I will go there by myself and take 2 big trays of brownies that Marcia made for the picnic, according to her mother's recipe that has been spread around the world. So Yuda comes to me and says, I have a poem by Yair Zakovich, from a book that Yair Zakovich wrote, poetry all about Yeshua, the Messiah, and stories of the New Testament. Well, Yair Zakovich and I were students at the same time at the university in the Bible department. We had a lot of classes that were common for us. We studied with the same teachers, and we weren't close friends, but we were co-students together. And Yuda gave me these 4 short lines of a poem, and he said, I want you to teach about the Lord's Supper, and I want you to use Yair Zakovich's poem. So I called today Yair Zakovich and reminded him who I am, and we remembered many things together from our classes and meetings that we've had. Many years have passed since we've been in contact, but here is the poem that he wrote about the Lord's Supper, and I'm going to translate it to English. I am the bread that comes from heaven. I am the manna, and everyone who eats from my flesh tastes the sorrow of the world, pain of the world. I was touched by the poem. I called him and I said, Yair, I am very happy to talk to you again and to remember things from the past, but I am very, very pleased and very impressed by the book of poems that you wrote, about Yeshua, the Messiah, and texts from the New Testament. And I'm planning on teaching today about this poem that you wrote about. I am the bread that comes down from heaven. I am the manna. And I asked him, we haven't seen each other for a while. The last time we met was in the airport in Tel Aviv, in the Lod airport, and we were both flying to different directions. And we had time in the business lounge. So I want to ask you this question. Why did you write this poem specifically? And why did you write the whole book of 80-some, almost 90 pages of poetry about Yeshua? His answer was very simple. I love to read the New Testament. I read a lot in the New Testament. Well, I didn't know that, but I was very happy to find out. So here is the poem again that's going to start my discussion. I am the bread that comes down from heaven. I am the manna. And everyone who eats from my flesh tastes the sorrow, the suffering of the world. I like it. Very short, very compact, and very, very important for us to understand it. Now, the main text about what is called the Lord's Supper is not actually from the Gospels, from the evening of Passover, in which Yeshua shares in Mount Zion with his disciples the Passover meal. It's there. It's probably initiated there. But the main text actually comes from the Apostle Paul in his first letter to the Corinthians, chapter 11, from verse 17 down. I'm going to read it. Now, in giving these instructions, I do not praise you, since you come together not for the better, but for the worst. For first of all, when you come together as a community, as a church, ecclesia, I hear that there are divisions among you, and in part I believe it. For there must also be factions among you, that those who are approved may be recognized among you. Therefore, when you come together in one place, it is not to eat the Lord's Supper. For in eating, each one takes his own supper ahead of others, and one is hungry and the other one is drunk. What, do you not have houses to eat and drink in? Or do you despise the church of God and shame those who have nothing? What shall I say to you? Shall I praise you in this? I do not praise you. From here, Paul, from verse 23 of chapter 11, gives instructions. For I received from the Lord that which I also delivered to you, that the Lord Yeshua, on the same night in which he was betrayed, took bread, and when he had given thanks, he broke it and said, "Take, eat, this is my body, which is broken for you. Do this in remembrance of me." Verse 25, in the same manner he also took the cup after supper, saying, "This cup is the new covenant in my blood. This do as often as you drink it in remembrance of me." Verse 26, for as often as you eat this bread and drink this cup, you proclaim the Lord's death till he comes. Verse 27, 1 Corinthians 11. Therefore, whoever eats this bread and drinks this cup of the Lord is unworthy. No, whoever drinks this cup of the Lord in an unworthy manner will be guilty of the body and the blood of the Lord. But let a man examine himself, and so let him eat of the bread and drink of the cup. For he who eats and drinks in an unworthy manner eats and drinks judgment to himself, not discerning the Lord's Supper. For this reason, many are weak and sick among you, and many sleep. In other words, they died. For if we would judge ourselves, we would not be judged by others. But when we are judged, we are chastened by the Lord, that we may not be condemned with the world. Therefore, brethren, when you come together to eat, wait for one another. But Therefore, brethren, when you come together to eat, wait for one another. But if anyone is hungry, let him eat at home, lest you come together for judgment. And the rest will set in order when I come. That's what Paul writes about the Lord's Supper, the communion. And the reason that I'm starting with this reading is in order to stress the importance of this reading. You see, it's very important. At the end of Paul's word, he says, some of you are sick, some of you are even fell asleep, in other words, died, for the misuse, misapplication, and misbehavior during this important event. Now, the event that Yeshua was doing with his apostles was the Passover. We know that from the Gospels. And in the Passover, there is eating of matzah bread and unleavened bread, matzah bread, and drinking of wine or grape juice. Why am I saying oil grape juice? Because the truth is that in some places it was grape juice. In some places it was grape juice, in other places it was wine. All depends on the place. In Qumran, for example, it was grape juice. And that's the difference. Qumran was in the desert by the Dead Sea, hot weather. You can't keep wine there very, very well unless you have a refrigerator. So this is the background of this teaching. And the background further in deeper is that one of the members of our congregation asked, what does it mean that if you don't eat it in a worthy manner, if you eat it unworthy, these things are going to happen to you? Well, my dear brothers and sisters, I have to dig deeper and get into material that probably you're not familiar with. This is not the first time we read in the Bible that people blessed each other with bread and wine. The first time that we hear it is in the book of Genesis. It's in chapter 14 of the book of Genesis. It's telling the story of Abraham that in spite of the fact that his nephew betrayed him, Lot, and greedily took the best part of the land on the shores of the Dead Sea in a place called Sodom, when kings from the north, from Mesopotamia, from Syria, northern Syria, came and conquered Sodom, and they took Lot and his family as captives, and they took the booty and the wealth with them. Abraham and 318 men that were members of his camp that joined him from Mesopotamia came to the land of Canaan as God ordered them in chapter 12 of Genesis. There were men between the age of 20 and 50, 318 of them. Listen, at that age, in that time, they were probably mostly married and at least having one child. That means that Abraham's camp was very large and it had at least 1,000 people. If these are between the age of 20 and 50, 318 men. He chased the five kings of the north that took Lot and his family as hostages, and he freed Lot and his family, and he also got the booty that the Mesopotamian marauders took from the people that lived at Sodom at that time. Maybe not only Sodom. So Abraham stops in Jerusalem on his way back to where he was in Hebron. And the ruler of Jerusalem, who's called Melchizedek, Canaanite, maybe Egyptian even, ruler at that time, meets Abraham at the entrance to the city and greets him with bread and wine. This we can read in Genesis chapter 14, verses 18 and 20, that Melchizedek meets Abraham and shares with him bread and wine and blesses him in the name of the Lord. So the eating of bread and wine is not always associated with Yeshua and with the Messiah and with Sunday and with the church, with the disciples of the Messiah. That's already true in the Bible. But if we dig deeper, closer to the time of the New Testament, we find out that in Qumran, on the shores of the Dead Sea, northern shores of the Dead Sea, northwestern shores of the Dead Sea, in Qumran, every Saturday night, the community gathered together. The elders entered first and sat in their places, and then the more junior members of the community entered, and in the end, the youngest members of the community entered. They sat together, and I have the text here from Qumran in Hebrew, in the original language, and it's important for me to share with you because it's interesting, and what makes it more interesting is the fact that this is something that already was being done for probably 200 years before Yeshua. Every Saturday night, they gathered together. The men, the elders entered first, and then, according to the order of the hierarchy of the community, the rest of the people entered. And they came for this purpose: to bless the bread and the grape juice. In Qumran, they didn't drink wine, they drank grape juice from the hand of the priest, of the head of the community. And first they blessed the bread, and then the cup, the wine, the grape juice. And there had to be at least 10 men there to make that ceremony stick, because 10 men is a full-fledged community. Yeshua said, where 2 or 3 gather in my name, I'll be there with them. In Qumran and in Pharisaic Judaism, it was 10 men, not 2 or 3. And then there is a whole description in Qumran, the Manual of Discipline, and some of the other manuscripts as well, of how the priest, the head of the community, takes the bread and he blesses it, and then takes the grape juice and he blesses it, and he passes it from hand to hand, and all of it is done from 200 years BC on. For what? For the Messiah of Israel to stretch out his hand and to bless the wine and the bread and the wine and the bread. That means that this practice is not invented by Yeshua. It means that this practice is adopted by Yeshua, not invented by Yeshua. And that's of great importance. Why? Because Jews were not the only ones to use bread and wine as a format to bless. It was a community affair, not an individual affair. It was a community affair long before Yeshua was born in Bethlehem. And it continues in Judaism until today. Hasidic Judaism, they have every Friday night a meal, and then every Saturday night they have another meal. And the one on Saturday night, in some circles, and around Passover period, is called the Messianic Feast, Seudat HaMashiach. Very interesting. Very interesting. Until today, Hasidic groups, especially the Lubavitch, the Chabad Hasidic group that they have their center in Brooklyn, in 77 Eastern Parkway in Brooklyn, they still do it before Passover. A few days before Passover, it's called the Messiah's Feast. Why? Because they're graduating their classes for the year. The Orthodox year of education, of school, starts after Passover, ends at Passover. Now, this practice of the bread and wine, we see it with Melchizedek. He was not a Jew, he was not an Israelite. He might have been an Egyptian governor with the title of Melchizedek, and I forgot the official name of it, but there were dolls, like Barbie dolls, made from clay, of every one of the vassals, servants of the pharaohs that administered the conquered territories by Egypt. And on that clay figurine, there were curses made, written on them, And if that vassal, this appointed official by Egypt that ruled that territory, was unfaithful, the Pharaoh would take the clay doll, break it, and apply the curses that were written on it on that servant that went sour. So Melchizedek was a real historical figure, and in Egyptian, probably his name was Abdi Khipa, the servant of Khipa, one of the Egyptian gods. So, we are now in the 21st century, and we meet on Saturday, and we take communion in our congregation. Now, the churches take communion on Sunday. Why do they take communion on Sunday? Because Sunday in the Roman Empire, in the Greco-Roman world, was the day of the sun. The sun was one of the main idols, main gods of the Greco-Roman world. It was a holiday. And where did they get it that they should take it on Sunday? They didn't get it from the New Testament. Because when Yeshua blessed the bread and drank the cup and gave his apostles to drink it, what did he say? He didn't say do it every Sunday. He said do it as often as you do it. How often do you do it? As often as you do it. Now, the text that they use to say that it's Sunday is in Greek. The important place is in the book of Acts, chapter 20, verse 7, and it reads like that in Greek. En miaton Sabbaton. What word did you understand? I'm repeating the Greek. En miaton Sabbaton. What word did you understand? The only word you understood is one. Sabbaton. Sabbath. Mia means first thing, or immediately after. Yeah? After the Sabbath. They gathered together, chapter 20 of the book of Acts, in order to break bread, to take the communion. And Paul preached till midnight, and they broke bread after that. One guy fell off the window, died, and I suppose Paul resurrected him. Now, this phrase "en miaton Sabbaton" doesn't appear only in Acts chapter 20, verse 7. That same phrase appears again in the last chapter of the Gospel of Mark. Let me go there and read it to you right there from Mark, the Gospel of Mark, chapter 16, and I'm going to read it. It appears twice, but I'm going to read it from verse 16. Not 16, sorry. Not verse 16. So sorry about that. Verse 9 of chapter 16. And the English New King James Version reads like that. Now when he rose early of the first day of the week, he appeared first to Mary Magdalene, out of whom he had cast 7 demons. I'm repeating the English. Now when he rose early on the first day of the week. Now what does the Greek say about this? The Greek Bible What does it say? The Greek New Testament, Mark chapter 16, verse 9. It says like that. Anastes de proi prote Sabbatu. When did he rise? First thing after the Sabbath. When is the first thing after the Sabbath? Saturday night, just like Qumran. Saturday night, just like Qumran. And this same phrase, or very similar phrase, but with the same context, appears again in the New Testament in Acts chapter 20, verse 7. And it's very interesting because the context, if you think about it, the context of chapter 20, verse 7 in the book of Acts is the context that the disciples actually gathered together with Paul there before he had to hurry and get on a ship and go to Jerusalem to celebrate the feast of Pentecost. So this was not the Passover, because the Passover is still in chapter 20, but in the earlier verses. He waited to celebrate Passover with the brothers in the Greek brothers, and after the Passover, he waited 7 days to celebrate the Lord's Supper with the disciples in another city in the Hellenistic world. So first of all, in summary, I want to I have here Babylon and other countries in the Middle East having similar customs of wine, bread and wine. It's a pretty universal thing, but I don't want to hold you up, and I don't want to be late to the picnic myself. So we have such, in rabbinical literature, such practices that are done on the holidays like Passover and like Shavuot, and like every major biblical holiday is ushered in by a meal, and every meal that is festive, like every Shabbat, in most Jewish homes around the world, you have bread and wine, and you bless the bread and bless the wine, and then you eat and enjoy the fellowship. So I'm not going to go to all list of cultures in the ancient world that had similar passages, like Melchizedek, and like the apostles, and like Yeshua inaugurated and gave it a new meaning. To what we call the Kiddush, he gave it a new meaning. The bread and the wine are reminders of his sacrifice and of his glorification and of the joy of his return. Because wine is something that celebrates joy, not sadness. So, the bread is the manna that came from heaven. And this is interesting because in Qumran they use the same imagery, because they're celebrating the Messiah, as the text says. So, dear brothers and sisters, in conclusion, this is what I want to say. The Lord's Supper doesn't have to be Sunday, it can be Sunday. But Yeshua said, as often as you do it. Did they celebrate the Passover? Yes, they celebrated the Passover, and they took the bread and the wine. We see that in 1 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 7 and 8. They celebrated, and Paul commands all the churches of the Gentiles to celebrate the Passover because Christ is our Passover. So, yes, they celebrated the Passover. They took matzah bread and wine and celebrated Yeshua's birth, ministry, death, and resurrection. Hallelujah. Let's do it with respect. Let's do it with some fear of God, and let's do it with the joy, like Yair Zakovich's poem that says that anybody who tastes that bread tastes the suffering, the sorrow of the world. So in a way, it's a happy occasion. In another way, it's a reminder of the sacrifice of Yeshua, his flesh and his blood. May God have mercy on all of us and bless us and heal our countries. In Yeshua's name, Amen.
Nativia International, www.netivyahinternational.org.